co-founders of the Robert Jackson Center, and so thrilled to have this amazing assemblage of folks who are involved in the international criminal law community. And kudos for all that you do on behalf of mankind. And it's at that level, and it's just a thrill for us to act as a host. Goes without saying that the Robert H. Jackson Center is here with its mission to advance the legacy of Justice Robert H. Jackson. We've not only the answer to the Jeopardy question, named the only person in the history of the United States to be a Solicitor General, Attorney General, and a Justice of the Supreme Court, but for our purposes, was the Chief American Prosecutor at the Nuremberg trial. And we like to believe that there is a direct linkage from the accomplishments of Justice Jackson at Nuremberg to that which you are all involved in today. So we're just thrilled to be part of that hosting process. For the film, and we are filming this, and we did get all your consents, didn't we, beforehand? I think that is a yes. This is the third time we've actually conducted this type of evening activity. The first one was gathering together the 4 chief prosecutors of the Sierra Leone Tribunal, talking about Charles Taylor. Last year, of course, we had the opportunity to interview His Royal Highness Prince Zaid, who was obviously campaigning for this award. I didn't fully appreciate at the time, for those who were here know, that I took a lot of abuse from him. I was really just a platform for what he had going on, so welcome back. And today we're going to have a chance to talk about something which, as we look in the lineage from Nuremberg to Yugoslavia, Rwanda, there was something in between, something that most people just don't know about, so we're going to talk about that. I'll put this into perspective. Why we're doing this today really flashes back to 2 years ago. 2 years ago, Sir Desmond came here a day early, and we had an opportunity to have him be interviewed by me in front of a large number of University of Buffalo law students. Dean, and we welcome you here. Thank you very much. I'm the Dean of the University of Buffalo Law School here. And so with that, we had an opportunity to interview Sir Desmond. And during the course of that interview, he talked about something that he was involved in 1981 called the Gambia trial, and we'll talk more about that. And he then said aloud as how at that time there was Hassan Jallow, there was Fatou Bensouda, all part of this heretofore to me unknown trial. So later on during that course, 2 years ago, I talked a little bit about you, I'll talk to you a little bit, and I said, you know, there's a story here. There really is a story. So we're going to watch a little 3.5-minute little vignettes to kind of get our head around it, and then we're going to ask them to come forward. So, Ed, if we can show that. Sir Desmond yesterday, and he reminded me of a time where both you and Hassan Jallow were involved with a dispute in Gambia.
Yes.
What was that about?
You know, Greg, this is not very well documented, but I think Gambia has turned out to be that country that practiced or implemented international criminal justice very, very early on. In 1981, there was an attempted coup in the Gambia, and the coup was foiled. And the government of the Gambia wanted to hold accountable, of course, those who staged the coup, those who were most responsible for the coup. And we set up a tribunal. It was like a special criminal division within the High Court, Supreme Court of the Gambia. And we did not only have Gambians to prosecute or to be judges. We had judges and lawyers from all over the Commonwealth coming into Gambia to practice in this special branch, a criminal division, to judge those most responsible for the coup. And Sir Desmond, was one of them. He was actually, I think, the Chief Prosecutor then.
and probably the first experiment in modern times to set up a hybrid court, because this was truly a hybrid court. It was hybrid. It was a court which was grafted into our own national court structure, but it comprised non-Gambians. The judges and the prosecutors were all Gambians, supported, of course, by other officials in terms of police investigators, etc.
But yes, Fatou Bensouda, who is the Chief Prosecutor of the ICC, together with Hassan Jallow, assisted me in creating and running this court, which till the courts were set up the ad hoc courts were set up in 1993 by the Security Council, ICT, ICTY, so on and so forth, was the first court after Nuremberg in Turkey to be set up in an internationalized fashion.
You recognize yourself?
Yeah.
We're going to start with Hassan. You actually wrote a book, and within the book there is a chapter entitled An Unconstitutional Challenge, 30th July 1981, Attempted Coup d'etat. And you started by saying, July 30th, 1981, half awake and still in bed, I tuned into Radio Gambia for the 7 a.m. early morning news. Instead of the news, there was a strident voice announcing the overthrow of the government, the establishment of a Supreme Revolutionary Council, and the adoption of a Marxist-Leninist ideology for your country, the Gambia. Set the stage for, did you know it was coming, or what was going on in your country at that time?
There was hardly any warning it was coming. I wasn't aware it was coming at all. The first time I learned of this attempt to establish a communist government in my country was that morning of 30th July itself at 7 o'clock. Before that, of course, the Gambia being an open democratic country at that time, there were all kinds of dissident groups. There were opposition parties and other dissident groups which sometimes espouse left-wing or communist ideologies. But this was quite a surprise. It came in as a surprise.
Now, the timing was really very specific. What was going on in your country at that time?
Well, the president was away. It was sort of very well timed. The president had taken holidays, and during the holiday he had traveled to London to attend the wedding of Charles and Diana. And it was.
Is anybody watching that, by the way?
The whole mission was not for the purpose of the wedding, but he was on leave. And he went to London and was attending that. Then this attempt took place in his absence. It lasted for a week or so and was put down with the help of Senegalese forces and forces from other countries. I can't name some of them because it was clandestine operations which took place. Within a week it was put down, but at great cost to the country. When the rebels took over the country, they opened the prisons, they armed prisoners, they armed young men, and there was a lot of shooting. And Amnesty estimated that between 500 and 1,000 people lost their lives. And this was in a small country of just over 1 million people, a very small country. So that was really a big loss. There was a lot of destruction and damage to property as well. Shops were looted, vehicles burnt out, and so on. So it cost the country a great deal.
During that time period, 10 days or so, where they actually, before the coup d'etat was foiled, you're at that point you're in the state attorney's office, right?
Yes, I was principal state attorney then in the Attorney General's office at the time. Yes.
What was it like during that 10 days?
Very difficult. I mean, for somebody especially like me, knowing all these prisoners were out on the loose and armed, it was difficult. As a matter of fact, on the first day I had ventured out, taking a walk in the town, and when some of them started waving and shouting my name from the trucks, waving their arms, I decided to retreat. So it was very dangerous. Most people stayed at home. Because of the indiscriminate shooting and looting and burning.
Fatou, you're 20 years old, not quite an attorney at that time.
Yes.
What was your sense of that time period?
As Hassan said, it was a time when, in a relatively very peaceful country, the Gambia, we've never experienced anything like that before. So it was a time of much insecurity, very unsafe to be out in the streets. There was a lot of looting, there was a lot of shooting, and there was not the structure as such of this group of people who decided to stage the coup. So there were those who just joined, not receiving directives from anybody, but settling scores. So it was really a time that was very, very insecure in the Gambia. And I had just finished school and started working at the law courts as what we would call a clerk of court. It's like a registrar. I would read and make the announcements of the cases, and I will keep the files, etc. And whilst I was still waiting to go abroad for my studies, it was a period when this tribunal was set up, and I had the opportunity to work there.
Well, I'm just going to, again, the 10 days, what's it like in the courtroom at the time? Are you wondering whether somebody's going to just storm the court? Because everything was fair game.
No, during those 10 days, of course, the tribunal has not, the special division has not yet been set up. And I think it was also a 10 days that nobody was working. It was really a time of grave insecurity in the country, looting, shootings going on. So most of us stayed at home.
When did the president come back? I mean, he's partying in England, Diana and Charles, and he decides, how's he enter back?
Well, the president came back very, very quickly to Senegal, to Dakar. I think by the second day of the takeover by this communist group, he was back in Dakar, Senegal, the neighboring country, because we had a defense pact with Senegal at the time. So when he arrived in Dakar, he invoked the provisions of that pact with Senegal, and they agreed to intervene in order to put it down.
So it didn't
it didn't take long.
It didn't take long.
And he came back into the country during that week itself, and was involved in trying to put it down the struggle.
So really, was it the Senegalese army that sort of came in under this pact?
Yes.
Yes.
The Senegalese army came in, yes.
Then what happens? You foil the coup. I suspect a few of the leaders probably left.
Yes, most of the leaders left. Kukoi Samba Sanyang, who was the leader, fled to Guinea-Bissau. Then there were reports he went to Libya, because Libya and Russia were alleged to have been involved in the attempt to overthrow the government. As a matter of fact, in one of their first broadcasts, the rebels called on Russia at the time to come to their help when they learned that the president had invoked the defense treaty with Senegal. They called publicly on the radio for the Russians to intervene. So it became also part of this conflict during the Cold War. But the president came in, and with the help of the Senegalese and other friendly forces, it was put down. But most of the leaders, as I said, fled to Guinea-Bissau, to Libya, and also some to Cuba as well. The leader died just last year, I think.
Last year, yes.
Last year, he died in exile last year.
From an outside perspective, Cold War, what was the strategic significance of Gambia? Was it the river? I mean, why would Russia be of interest, and Cuba? Basically the communist force.
Well, the Gambia is a small place, but it's of strategic importance in that region there, given the river as a means of navigation and communication into the interior. Through the river, you can travel to Senegal, to Mali, to Guinea-Conakry. You get good connections to all those countries. At the same time, what was going on during that period also was, and this is linked to the special court for Sierra Leone as well, was that Gaddafi at that time was taking quite a number of West Africans to Libya to train them, for them to come back and overthrow their governments. Charles Taylor was one of them. So you'd find there were connections between Charles Taylor's group in Liberia, the groups in Sierra Leone, the groups in Burkina Faso, and this group in the Gambia, which tried to overthrow the government. So it was really a regional conspiracy to try and change the politics in that region through Gaddafi, allegedly through Russia and the Cubans as well.
So the president declares a state of emergency. Does that kick in your office now into extraordinary powers?
Yes, yes. Our constitution at the time allowed the declaration of a state of emergency, which then had to be approved by the National Assembly. That was done. And once that was done, of course, there were powers granted to the executive to impose curfews, to also arrest and detain people who were suspected of having been involved in the attempted coup. Quite a number of people were detained, 1,000, just over 1,000. But under the Constitution, they all were served with reasons for detention. Their names were gazetted in order to avoid secret detentions. And they were each brought before a review tribunal within 14 days of their detention to determine the need or the legality for any further detention. And so I was involved in setting up those tribunals, those review tribunals, in also then sending advice to the president once the tribunals had done their work as to whether that particular person should be released from further detention or should continue to be in custody pending investigations.
So you're pretty busy.
I was involved in that, incidentally, with Fatou's uncle, who
Yes.
was my senior at the time, Mr. Mbu. The two of us were responsible for then advising the president on the need for continued detention or otherwise of the accused. And at the same time involved then in building up cases for prosecution. Well, one important decision which was taken once the emergency was declared, the government took the decision that, given that the damage had been widespread and many people, many Gambians had been touched by the events, that no Gambian judge or Gambian prosecutor should be involved in those cases. So we just served then, as investigators or people who coordinated the investigations. And that's where Sir Desmond de Silva then comes in. He was the first chief prosecutor.
Gambia at the time was part of the British Commonwealth.
That's right.
Yes.
And therefore it was reached out within the British Commonwealth to seek help. And what did you reach out to? And how does Sir Desmond get in the game?
Well, the Gambia was Commonwealth. We had a tradition of working with Sierra Leone, with Ghana, with Nigerian judges and magistrates. And in that context, we were able to get attorneys for prosecution and also for judges. But I think Sir Desmond can pick up there about how he came to the Gambia. He was the first chief.
How'd you get in the game?
Well, one must remember that this was the high watermark of the Cold War. And the River Gambia was one the Russians had been seeking to put ships into. And for 250 years, the Russians had been looking for what they call warm water ports. And this coup d'etat, attempted coup d'etat in the Gambia, presented the Russians with a warm water port on a platter. And there was a great deal of nervousness in Washington and London and so on and so forth. And because the Gambia had, on independence, because they'd inherited the English Treason Act of 1351, I got called into the Foreign Office and they said, well, there are only three people who understand this. One is dead, one is mad, and the other is you. Because I'd operated this act in Sierra Leone in 1967, because they too had a problem, and I had to go out there. And so I understood something about this act, you see. So I got sent out, so I went to see President Sadar Jawara, who'd been reinstalled at the President's house in Banjul, and I said to him, now look, I said, you do understand that the English Treason Act of 1351, the only penalty is death. They didn't mess around in 1351, you see. The only penalty is death. And he said, oh dear, we haven't hanged anyone here for 30 years, and the hangman is dead. So I said, well, we'll have to deal with that. And so we had to provide, I had a draft, firing squads and, things of that kind. But anyway, What we did was, we had a lot of investigators, and there were 1,000 people in detention, and a lot of people had done the same sort of things, you see, that amount to treason. But given the penalties, one was very conscious of the fact that it would have been mass execution. So we really had to cut it down to those who bore the greatest responsibility, a phrase that keeps cropping up. I tried to leave out those with big families and all sorts of things, but ultimately I was forced into tracking those who'd been trained in Moscow and trained in Libya, because again, you must remember, these were Cold War days, and one was expected to do that. So having drafted indictments, I think, against a total of about 45 people, one must remember that we finished 45 trials in 4 years, which some people think is a remarkable achievement, and that is trials and appeals and so on and so forth. And every prosecutor came in from outside. Every prosecutor working under me came in from outside, other parts of the Commonwealth. Every judge came from the Commonwealth. So it was a totally internationalized court, completely internationalized court. And I mean, I wouldn't have worked under any other system because the coup d'etat had touched almost every family in one way or the other. And it would have been a process that was no longer transparent if, in fact, we'd used local prosecutors and local judges and so on and so on. So it worked wonderfully. And as I say, I mean, not only did it work wonderfully, it worked very quickly. And I mean, we kept the evidence to strictly that which was needed to prove the indictments and so on and so forth. And I remember Fatou, of course, when I was prosecuting, she was reading out the indictments to the defendants and things of that kind. We had to work very hard, because I remember on the third day, one of the defendants, the judge had risen, and I was just about to leave my place at counsel's table, and one of the defendants shouted my name and signalled me to come over. So I sort of went over to the dock, and he said to me, "You know, you're working too hard. You're going to be dead before we are." He said, "I suggest this coming weekend you take a girl and go to a bird sanctuary, and you know, there's a lovely bird sanctuary there." Well, I'm not going to tell you what I did, but anyway, he wasn't executed because one of the things I did was I persuaded the president before I left finally. I wrote him a letter to say that, you know, that when one looked down the trail of a nation's history, many countries, there are bright lanterns, and often the lanterns that burn brightest are those that cast the light of humanity over that path. And I think just one person was executed, I think one, but I think all others were spared. So I think I'm right in saying that. And so, although it was a long time ago now, that it was. And the Gambia got through all those events, had all those trials, and many of the people who were judges there went on to become judges in other places, judges of some distinction. So, I mean, I look back with considerable fondness on that court we created, because what we did was create the first internationalized court, which has never really been written about. Hassan has written about something about it in his memoirs, and it worked. It worked. And I think the people in the country had confidence in this court because it was a court that was untainted by local prejudice and things of that kind. Now, the principal culprit who escaped to Guinea, and he too, like Charles Taylor and others, had been trained by Gaddafi. And I mean, I remember, I mean, this is a sort of very personal story. He'd taken refuge in Guinea, and somebody in the government had worked out, and I think it was the Attorney General, he had worked out that we must get this man. So I was invited to come to dinner with the Attorney General. Another person was able to remain unsaid. And the Attorney General said, we want you to authorize the arrest of 150 people from Guinea who happen to be in Banjul. And I said, why? He said, well, we want to hold them as a hostage, hold them as hostages against the return of this man. So I said, I wouldn't do that. I refused to do anything of the kind. And he said, well, in that case, he made a lot of noise about it, and I simply left the table, and there was a flight leaving for London that evening. It was, I can't remember, British Caledonian, an airline that no longer exists, but I mean, there was a captain. The captain was actually having dinner at nearby tables. I went over to him and said, do you have any seats on your aircraft? So he said, yes, and so on and so forth. And I managed to get myself ticketed, and I took a car, and I went to the airport because I was going to have nothing more to do with this tribunal, being asked to have 150 hostages taken. And I was in the departure lounge when two police officers came and arrested me. They arrested me on the basis of having stolen a car to get to the airport. Well, anyway, they arrested me and took me back to Banjul. And I'd taken back the hotel which I'd left just a few hours before, and there still sitting at the table was the Attorney General, who produced a bottle of whiskey, put it on the table and said, forget it, you won, and there it is. So I carried on from that. And there was no more nonsense talked about hostages. And so there it was. So we completed what I think was a fairly sort of well-conducted series of trials. And as I say, despite the fact that capital punishment was the order of the day, and certainly the order of the day so far as the punishments were concerned, it was not meted out except in one case. And so, looking back, I personally feel very gratified that I was associated with that successful operation. So there it is.
Fatou, you're, again, being a registrar, reading the indictments, all of a sudden seeing this influx of non-Gambian prosecutors, judges. What was the buzz in the court? I mean, this is out of sync.
I think, as Sir Desmond said, it was those who came were very highly regarded, if I can put it that way. They were highly regarded, and he also talked about in 4 years we were able to complete this. And I think this is a good lesson for all of us to learn. But then, again, all of the judges and the prosecutors were coming from Commonwealth countries. And we did not have this problem of different systems or a hybrid sort of system that we had to work in, like most of the current tribunals have to do. So we were able to proceed really in a very quick fashion, and for 45 trials to take place in 4 years, I think is quite an achievement.
Just Hassan, one of the things that you wrote in your Journey for Justice was the Sheriff Dibba case, which you felt that was an important indication of how the process really worked. Why don't you talk a little bit about that, because I think that's very instructive.
Mm-hmm. Well, if I may go back a bit, it was a truly internationalized court. It didn't apply international law, but as Sir Desmond has indicated, I mean, it applied the common law and local Gambian law and some old English statutes, which some of us had never seen actually, let alone understood. But the judges were all non-Gambian, the prosecutors were all non-Gambian. And I think it's instructive that most of them then went on from there to play very senior roles in international criminal justice. Sir Desmond was first Chief Prosecutor of the Gambian Special Division, and he became Chief Prosecutor of the Special Court for Sierra Leone. Judge Ayola, who was Chief Justice of the Gambia at the time and very much responsible for running the court at that time, became President of the Special Court for Sierra Leone. you had Judge Jalaga King,
Yes.
who was a judge of the Special Division in the Gambia, who became a Justice of Appeal of the Special Court.
Yes.
And of course, you have Fatou Bensouda, who became Chief Prosecutor as well. So it really was a truly international court.
And
in the
Prosecutor Jallow.
Okay. Okay. But the whole thing, I think there are many lessons to draw from it. One is that it was a hybrid court, but because it applied a uniform system of law, the common law, all the judges, the prosecutors were from common law jurisdictions, as Fatou said. We did not run into these serious problems which caused delay in the current international tribunals. The language problems, the interpretation problems, the translation problems, and also the problems of understanding concepts from different legal traditions. So things moved fairly well, to the extent that from 1981 to 1984, we were actually able to complete the trials. The second thing is that it was done properly. There was due process. The Supreme Court exercised effective judicial oversight over, for instance, the whole process of detention. If, for instance, we did not serve a detainee on time with the reasons for detention, or we did not publish the particulars of the detainee in the press in time, or we did not take the detainee before a review tribunal on time, the court held that had the effect of nullifying the detention, of invalidating the whole detention itself. It was a very proactive court, which was concerned about maintaining, the fairness of the whole process. Then you had the Sheriff Diba case. The Sheriff Diba was then the leader of the opposition at the time, and there was a lot of suspicion that he had been involved in planning these events, because in the course of that week, he had been visited several times at his residence by the leader of the coup, of the rebels. Unfortunately, of course, they were the only ones who were at these meetings. And so it was difficult to tell what went on. And to the credit of Sir Desmond, and I still remember that, and I've narrated it in my book, when he reviewed that file of relating to the leader of the opposition who had been detained, he felt, and he gave a legal opinion, that the evidence was not strong enough to secure a conviction, and that any attempt at prosecution would appear to be a political move. Unfortunately, there were other foreign lawyers in the country who thought otherwise and who thought he should be prosecuted. So he was prosecuted, and in the end acquitted by the court. Then it fell on me now, Sir Desmond had left, to advise the government as to whether to appeal against that acquittal or not. And I felt also that an appeal would not succeed, and it would also send a wrong impression that he was being persecuted more than just being prosecuted. So he was acquitted by the court, and the president respected that decision. And not only that, but he went further to order his immediate release from detention. So it was a very fine, I think, example of adherence to the rule of law. Then also there was this other dimension to it, that it was not only at the trial stage that you had the foreign lawyers. Each of the accused had a right of appeal, but the appeal went to the Court of Appeal, which was then constituted to comprise the chief justices of the other countries, common law countries in West Africa, or their representatives. The Chief Justice of Nigeria, of Ghana, of Sierra Leone, or their designates, then sat on the Court of Appeal to review these cases. So it was removed really from the Gambian judges entirely. So it was a very difficult period for the country, but I think, as Amnesty itself recognized, that the process itself had been handled very, very, very fairly.
So you're dealing there in the court system with Sir Desmond.
Yes.
And we understand he has some certain dietary delicacies. You want to explain that?
Well, in several respects, I think our bush pigs were in great danger from Sir Desmond. He loved them. I think he loved to roast the bush pigs.
Well, the thing was, you see, I mean, no one was allowed to carry any firearms or ammunition because it was a ruling under a state of emergency. But there's no point in being in a position of authority without being able to have some benefits, so I wrote myself an authority. And I got
This is shocking.
I got some rifles out of the armory, and I remember shooting on Christmas Day, I can't remember which year it was, 81 possibly, or 82, I can't remember. And I remember bringing back a large 350-pound bush pig or wild boar to the hotel, and it was roasted, you see, on the beach, and plenty of tourists were able to have a splendid slice of excellent roast boar. It did the hotel a great deal of good, so and I enjoyed it too. So everyone was happy. So.
Now, I also understand you took a weekend off and with an idea of using those guns that you'd taken from the armory to go crocodile hunting. What was that all about?
Yes, I was told that there was a colony of white crocodiles. And I didn't believe it, but people said there were, you see. And after interrogating a number of people closely, I discovered that about 150 miles upriver, there was an island in the middle of the river. The river was about a mile wide. And so I took some people and I sort of went up by road, and then I had to walk through the bush. And I got there about midday, and it was about 120 Fahrenheit, you know. And we were making our way through the bush, you see. And it's very curious, I came across an old man carrying a rifle, and I was with some police officers. They decided to arrest him, and they brought him to me, it was this old man. And he was wearing a sort of German trench coat from the sort of First World War edition, you see. And he was carrying a gun, and it was much more dangerous to the people behind the gun than to anything in front. So he was interrogated as to why he was carrying the gun, and he said, well, it was a gun. It was a German manufactured about 1875. We looked at it, you see, and something they'd left behind after the First World War somewhere. And he said he was looking for hippos to shoot. And I couldn't understand how he could shoot a hippo and carry it. But he said, no, I was a fool to ask such a question. I pursued this a little more closely. Turned out, well, he would shoot the hippo and then wait a few days till it sort of swelled up, and then he would float it down the river, you see, to his village. It was presumably on a string or a cord or something. And so I thought, well, yes, that sounds all right. Anyway, the police officers with me said, no, this is a capital offence, you see. I said, never let the man go. I told him to beware, not to be caught again, because, you know, whoever caught him again may not be so generous, and I wished him good luck with his shooting of hippos, and off I went to look for the white crocodile. And indeed, there was this island, you see, I came to, and so I sent for a pair of field glasses. I couldn't see anything. So I got a goat out of a nearby village and had it tethered in the water, you see. And it started bleating, as goats do. And shortly, I could see some movement, you see, and suddenly I saw these pearl grey bodies, you see, slip into the water. And I thought, right. So I was using a .22 long rifle, hollow-nosed bullet, and you shoot the thing through the eyes, and it's the brain shot, and they die immediately, and they sort of go revolve in the water. So, and if we miss, well, it just bounces off them; they don't feel it. So I'd taken one of these rifles with me, and a crocodile started approaching this. And I was getting ready to shoot it, when suddenly there was tremendous kerfuffle. So I said, well, what's wrong? And they said, no, you can't shoot. I said, why can't I shoot? They said, well, these crocodiles are a fertility symbol to the ladies of the village, you see. I said, what do you mean a fertility symbol? They said, well, if a girl gets married and hasn't had a child 3 years, she comes and kneels naked by the banks of this river for 24 hours, and sure enough, 9 months later, she gives birth to a child. So any girl who knelt anywhere in the world naked, you know, is likely to produce a child in 9 months. I was not terribly persuaded by this argument, and I was getting ready to shoot the beast when somebody came and actually knocked the barrel down. I said, I was going to have a riot on my hands. What with the insurrection in Banjul, now a riot in this village. I thought, well, I better give the whole thing up. And so anyway, so it was then on the return journey that I saw this bush pig and I shot it. So I got it. So I had there was some consolation. So I put it in the vehicle, and I came back to Freetown. Now that was the story of the wild crocodiles. So they actually exist. I saw them, and they were after the goat. So I'm happy to say I got out of the water pretty quickly because it didn't the goat didn't like the experience too much. So anyway, the goat was saved, the crocodile was saved, and a good time was had by all.
Now, was that the real lesson of this whole Gambia trial?
Real lesson of what?
Lesson. Was this the legacy for you? The white crocodile fertility story? Is that the walk away?
Well, I mean, it is something that happened. You know, it's one of the curious things. Many curious things have happened to me. This is one of the more curious because I didn't believe the story of the white crocodile, but sure enough it was, and I didn't realize that they were a fertility symbol. If I did, I might have taken a different view and not want to shoot them. But just to tell me, just as I was raising the rifle, you see, to pick up song and dance about it, I thought they were waiting rather late to tell me. But anyway, there it is. I took the hint in the end. So I was not oblivious of their concerns, so there it was.
Well, you know, when we do the documentary on the Gambia trial of 1981, that's going to be very visual. You know, one of the things that strikes me, here we have a panel of three superstar prosecutors in the international criminal law, but two of them are from a very small country. Did this 1981 trial influence sort of the direction of your career so that you kind of got to the points where you are today? Can we say that?
I think, well, for me, just working in the courts at the time, fresh out of school, working in the courts is something that I've always wanted to do. And I think that the tribunal, the setting up of this division itself, and working for the first time with lawyers who are not from the Gambia, with judges who are not from the Gambia, was actually a bonus for me. Of course, it just entrenched my desire to do this work. This is what I wanted to do. By the time the cases were over, I had no doubt whatsoever in my mind that this is my career. It was crystal clear for me. But I think I just want to say that what happened then in the Gambia, if you take it in context to what is happening now, I think it's very significant. This was a small country that decided, for reasons of accountability, impartiality, fairness to hearing, all the good reasons why we have international criminal justice, decided to go that way. And today you have this big pushback against the ICC from the African Union, and even going to the extent of having a resolution to exempt sitting head of state from trial. I think the setting up of the court itself in the Gambia, again, demonstrates for a long time the leadership that Africa or African countries have taken in international criminal justice. Okay, we did not apply international criminal law then. We applied the local domestic law. But the fact that we had judges and prosecutors from all over the Commonwealth coming to the Gambia for this tribunal does demonstrate leadership at a very, very early stage. And I think we need to, especially in Africa, we need to remind ourselves again of the steps that we had taken for accountability, for justice, rule of law, and as lessons that we should take from setting up that tribunal.
You were a state attorney's office. How did this impact your career path?
Well, It may not have directly impacted on my career in international law, but clearly in the state law office I was working very much on criminal matters. I was also at the time in charge of matters relating to human rights and international law. And all those together, I think, may have pushed me further into international criminal justice. But the establishment of this special division of the Gambia Supreme Court is not very well known. We tend to always say that between Nuremberg and the establishment of the ICTY in the early 90s, there is nothing. But clearly there was this, I think, this great experiment from a very small country which hasn't received much publicity. Going further down the line now, we can perhaps again look at another example from Africa in the form of the establishment of the special division in the Senegalese courts to prosecute Hissène Habré. This was just, I think, about 2 years ago or so, that the African heads of states decided that one of their former colleagues ought to be prosecuted for crimes he committed whilst head of state. But since he was out of his country, they authorized his host country, Senegal, to set up a special division within its own courts and to exercise jurisdiction over him. That also has been a very unique step in international criminal justice, which has occurred in the African continent. And I think these two examples, show what the possibilities for dealing with some of these offenses in Africa and within Africa itself.
Sir Desmond, I'll give you the final word. What's the legacy of this 1981 experiment in Gambia?
Well, I mean, it convinced me that international courts work, an internationalized court can work, and that I could bring in people from all parts of the Commonwealth and actually organize 44 trials or 45 trials and have them completed in 4 years. And, I look back now with some nostalgia at the way in which we did it. And I'm really puzzled why trials are taking so long these days. In more sophisticated tribunals than the one that took place in the trials that took place in the Gambia with, in the circumstances in which we described. But we did justice. We did it honorably, we did it openly, we did it in a transparent fashion, and there's never, ever been any criticism about it. And in fact, Amnesty International, I think you mentioned, in its report on those trials, said there was not one blemish on the conduct of those trials, and I'm happy to have played a part in that process. And if that is the legacy, I'm proud to have been a part of it, and I'm proud that my two colleagues on either side of me were in it with me.
This has been a moment in time, certainly for us here, to learn something about what I guess very few people knew about, and that here, 3 participants who've gone on to great things. We're all together, one place, one time, cutting their teeth, if you will, in international criminal law at the trial of Gambia. And on behalf of the Jackson Center, I want to thank you for sharing all that. That's terrific.